Live and pre-recorded, this is the Red Ticket Blues podcast. I am Brian Buckley. This is another edition of the Thursday Talk, where we interview a member from the world of sports. Last week, I was lucky enough to interview Sam Borden, who is the European sports correspondent for the New York Times. We talked about a variety of topics, including when he used to be a beat writer here in the States, the decision he made to go to Europe, obviously. We get into the FIFA scandal, why soccer is growing but not exactly there yet in the United States, and the influence of the NFL possibly in Europe. So enough of this. Let's get to it. We welcome in European sports correspondent for the New York Times and author of The Complete Idiot's Guide to Soccer Basics and Ace in America, a biography on former Yankee pitcher Chien-Ming Wang, Sam Borden. Sam, how are you today?
I'm doing just fine. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Sam is stationed in Paris right now, so this truly is a global podcast. I've read your columns before, but I decided to reach out to you to be a guest after reading a piece of yours regarding new details of the 1972 Munich tragedy. Why are family members coming forward now with details of their relatives?
You know, I think it's an ongoing thing, honestly. The two women, the two widows that are most prominently mentioned in my article have been at the forefront of pushing for recognition for their loved ones, the ones that were killed at the 72 Olympics. There's been sort of an ongoing battle with the International Olympic Committee to get recognition, at opening ceremonies of Olympics or to have a memorial built. Very recently, this past year, they had some success finally getting a memorial built in Munich. But my sense from the families was that the impetus for this sort of latest revelation, or, the revelation that people didn't otherwise know, was to sort of raise attention and make a greater push for inclusion in like the opening ceremony or closing ceremony or something like that.
For people that have not read the piece by Sam, it is a must read, and I truly mean that. Before we get into a few other topics, let's talk about you real quick. What came first, your love of writing or your love of sports?
Hard to say. I guess I grew up like any kid, loving sports. I played sports. I played soccer and baseball and ice hockey and golf and tennis too. But I was into writing at a very young age. My mother is an author and was an editor and a writer for magazines when I was a kid. So I was sort of always into that. I actually went to college planning to be a teacher, like an English teacher, and was hoping to, teach high school or college English after graduation. And I joined the campus newspaper at Emory when I was in school there, and 18 years later, here I am.
I think you probably would have been a great teacher, but I think this has worked out pretty well for you too. Before your move to Paris in January 2014, you served as the Yankees beat writer for the Daily News and then the Giants for the Times.
I did.
I've had current and former beat writers on the show before, and there are things that they loved about the job and things they didn't love so much. So for you, what were some of the pros and cons of covering the beat of those two teams?
Well, I would say that covering the NFL is certainly a more family-friendly job. I covered the Yankees when I was in my mid-20s, and I wasn't married. I was dating the woman who became my wife, and at the time she was a first-year associate at a law firm in New York City, and I was covering the Yankees, and so we barely saw each other. I mean, it was a very difficult life covering baseball. You're sort of on the road 1 week, home 1 week, on the road 1 week, home 1 week. And even when you're home, the games are usually at night. The Yankees, usually play long games. So it was very typical for me to get home, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, and she'd obviously be gone early in the morning before I woke up. So having a family life as a baseball writer is very challenging. Covering football was easier from a family perspective, but you get far less access to the players, far fewer opportunities to talk to the players and get to know them. So I guess, I would say that as a journalistic exercise, covering baseball was more of a challenge in that there's a lot more opportunity to get to know the players and to develop sources. And the Yankees in particular are such a competitive beat that, it really can be like an all-consuming job. The Giants, the opportunities to get to know the players is much less. And so I guess the challenge there is to be creative and come up with different ways to write about, the players and the games that everybody else is writing about with the same little access that you have.
You bring up your family involved in each position. They had to be a major factor with this move to Paris. So how did this big move to Paris and covering European sports, how did that materialize to be a full-time job and obviously moving to Paris?
Yeah, it was a pretty interesting process. When I got hired at the Times, during the interview process that everybody goes through before you get offered a job, I was asked a variety of questions by a variety of different editors, and one of them was, "Would you ever consider being a foreign correspondent?" And to be honest, at the time, I just wanted to get the job. So, like anybody, I said, "Oh yeah, I'd be willing to do anything." For the first couple of years at the Times, I covered the Giants. That was what I was hired to do. But the sports editor at the time was a guy named Joe Sexton, and he knew that I liked soccer and had sort of an interest in that. And as part of the Times's business decision to increase international coverage, he sent me over to Europe a few times during off season, or during slow weeks in the NFL, like a bye week or something like that, where I wrote some features about European soccer. From there, it was sort of an ongoing thing. Like, okay, well, these are good. Would it be better if you were over there full time? And over the course of the next year or so, that concept was debated and discussed. And then about a month before my wife and I had our second daughter, they offered me this posting. And it was, as you can imagine, a very sort of tumultuous time as we debated whether to go to Europe and also had our second daughter.
So now you're in Europe, you're in Paris. What immediately stands out to you as some of the differences of covering sports in the United States as opposed to European sports, soccer in particular?
Yeah, I mean, again, sort of the access to players over here is very, very different than it is with most American sports. I mean, even the NFL, to get access to a player after a game in America is sort of a standard operating procedure for, a journalist. If somebody does something good or does something bad, you're going to have the opportunity to ask them about it after the game. In Europe, that kind of access is definitely not the standard. I mean, certainly you wouldn't have the opportunity to go into a locker room the way we do in America. And even, speaking for a few minutes with somebody as they walk through a mixed zone, which is sort of like a fenced area that players walk through on their way to the bus, even that's no guarantee. So again, the sort of creativity or the sort of, ambition to come up with stories that don't revolve around post-game interviews or even pre-game interviews with players is a difference that I think any journalist going from America to Europe would have to get used to pretty fast.
Thankfully, to this point, there have not been any major terrorist attacks involving a sporting venue in the United States. With the recent tragedy in Paris, including a detonated bomb at a soccer match, is there still fear with fans surrounding sporting events?
No question. I mean, I think that that's a reality that everybody had to sort of confront head on. I mean, I think that anybody that's ever been to a sporting event recognizes that as a target for, terrorism or crime or anything, it's a very soft target. It's a very, there's a lot of people go in a lot of different directions in one place. And so that, like any target, makes it more appealing. And I think that, there are a lot more stadiums in Europe that are sort of in the middle of city centers or in the middle of residential areas, unlike, big NFL stadiums in America where you're sort of often separated from, the metropolis or the residential area. Some of the biggest soccer stadiums in Europe, like the Camp Nou in Barcelona or Old Trafford in Manchester, I mean, these are right, literally blocks away from houses or universities. I mean, they're right there. So, yeah, I mean, there's no question that as targets, they're still very much a concern. And I think that fans and journalists and players and everybody has to be more aware of, the policies that might change as a result of that.
So switching gears to something, staying within the game of soccer, but switching gears, obviously, how is it that the governing body of the most popular sport in the world can operate with such corruption and no oversight until, very recently?
I guess it's a mystery how that came to be. But then again, I suppose there are a lot of international organizations that have found ways to manipulate international law or foreign law and operate the way that they want. FIFA, is technically a nonprofit, is technically, based. Is technically created as an idea that it's a service organization to help grow the game of soccer. And so, those, as we've seen in any number of other instances in the business world, those kinds of organizations are rife for personal exploitation, I guess. And you're right. I mean, it seems unfathomable that it would have gone on for as long as it did. But, you look at the International Olympic Committee, too. I mean, it was a very similar situation. Corruption sort of perpetuated itself for decades until finally, there was a tipping point. And I think that most people that love soccer like to think, at least, that what's happened this past year is finally the tipping point for FIFA.
Sepp Blatter and some of his, constituents, for people that maybe don't follow soccer that much here in the United States, I mean, he makes Roger Goodell and for, some of his constituents look like choir boys compared to what they've actually done. After his 3-month suspension, do we see Sepp Blatter retake the reins of FIFA, or does this investigation, coupled with a new scandal he's recently been implicated in, prevent him from returning to some sort of substantial role with FIFA?
No, I mean, I think that his career in soccer is over. I mean, he resigned the presidency, or said that he would resign the presidency of FIFA, and there's a new election scheduled, in February. And I think at that point, whether he's suspended, banned, not banned, he's not going to be a significant factor in global soccer going forward. The question is just sort of whether his public record, as it were, is, goes down in confirmed scandal or reputed scandal. And so for him, that's the bigger question. Obviously, the situation with Michel Platini, who's the head of UEFA, the European soccer, and is hoping to be the next president of FIFA, his ban and his suspension is a more sort of immediate problem in that he wants to run for the presidency, and as it stands right now, he's not allowed to because he's been suspended.
Another criticism of FIFA and the Olympics that you spoke of earlier, for that matter, have been the crumbling infrastructure after the games have ended. You were in Brazil covering the World Cup in 2014. Was this a major topic of discussion amongst fans and media members?
Yeah, no question. I mean, especially in some of the smaller cities like Natal or Cuiabá, Curitiba. I mean, Manaus, the U.S. team played in Natal and in Manaus, and both places are smaller cities, certainly, and definitely don't have the sporting culture where you would think a 40,000 seat stadium would be necessary. So, yeah, I mean, I think I can't speak 100% on this, but I believe that I read recently that the stadium in Manaus had been turned into a parking lot or a jail.
That. Yeah, it was a parking lot for buses.
Yeah, right. I mean, so, they spent millions of dollars on that stadium, and they used it, I think, for, a dozen games all told at the World Cup and some other matches before and after. So, it's clearly the white elephant problem is a real issue. And I think that it's definitely something that the Olympic Committee has tried to address in terms of how it structures its bidding requirements, going forward. And I would like to think that FIFA will take a look at that same problem once it has its new leadership in place.
So negativity aside, for many people, this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. What was it like covering the World Cup?
It was very cool. I mean, especially a World Cup in Brazil, which I think, outside of England or English people could certainly stake a strong claim to being, the home or birthplace of soccer, and certainly its heartbeat. So, yeah, I mean, going to matches at the Maracanã, has seen a final there was fantastic. The people of the people of Brazil are incredibly welcoming and I think really embraced the spirit of the event. As a beat writer for the Yankees, seeing what happened in the 2004 ALCS when the Red Sox came back was one of the most incredible things that I've ever seen as a journalist. But that was, I'd say, would say was passed by being in the stadium for Germany 7, Brazil 1 in the semifinals of the World Cup. I mean, that was... it's hard to imagine seeing a sporting event that would top that in terms of surprise and drama and just sort of like the utter emotion that existed for all the Brazilian fans. It really was something that was difficult to describe and really hard to imagine ever happening again.
During the World Cup, 7 of your stories made the A1 page of the New York Times, showing that there is a growing interest in soccer in the United States. Since then, do you feel that MLS has capitalized on the interest that the World Cup provoked?
It's hard for me to say. I mean, obviously, I live, 3,000 miles away from the closest MLS team. And so I don't watch the matches with any kind of regularity. And I have to say, I don't keep up with the league on a day-to-day basis the way some of my colleagues in America do. I don't know that it's really apples to apples. I mean, the World Cup and even European club soccer are a very different thing than domestic, MLS soccer. And so I'm not sure that one correlates to the other. There's huge interest in figure skating at the Olympics every 4 years from American audiences, and obviously that doesn't translate to ratings and a presence for figure skating in the day-to-day sports life. So I think that MLS has a real potential and has grown incredibly over the 20 years it's been in existence. But I always hesitate a little bit to sort of take how America responds to the World Cup or the European Championships or even the Premier League and then equate that to how it should be doing with MLS. MLS is its own thing. It's a wonderful league. It's a wonderful group of people running it that have done incredible things for soccer in America. And I think that they're on their own steady arc that I'm not necessarily sure equates to or should necessarily be equated to, what happens for the national team or other international stuff.
No, and I understand that. But keeping all that in mind, everything you just said, I mean, the Women's World Cup victory for the United States has generated a lot of interest. And I realize that you are in Paris, but what do you think that an organization like MLS or any other, fledgling operation can do to increase viewership for the matches in the U.S. for both the men and women's game? I mean, will it take someone like Cristiano Ronaldo giving him a disgusting sum of money or to play here, or are there other factors at play?
No, I mean, I think I think that element of it is sort of, that ship has sailed. I think that the single, one-off David Beckham or Ronaldo or whoever, attraction in MLS is something that's good in the beginning stages of a league to help, keep attention focused on it. But I think that what MLS has done is followed a good path, and I think they're on that path. I mean, in the beginning, you focus on the fan experience. You want to make going to the games worthwhile. That's a good way to create buzz, create loyalty, create, attentiveness from a fan base. And I think they've done that. I mean, obviously in the beginning with football stadiums and sort of, shoehorned in matches onto football fields, it was a different experience. But I think now my sense is that most MLS stadiums are fantastic environments. And so, the going to the game element is there. Now, the next step, obviously, is what you mentioned, increased viewership and ratings and making revenue from TV dollars. And I think MLS is working on that and has made good progress in that. And I think, we're seeing more consistent starting times and TV windows, Friday nights or weekends. And I think that, they're on the path. I mean, to me, the Women's League would attempt to follow the same model, make the in-game experience as good as possible. Once that's established the way that it has been with MLS, then you move on into getting the larger audience with TV. And I think that's sort of the tried and true formula. And I think it takes time, but MLS is on the right path, no question.
Speaking of sports growing, the NFL has been trying much of the same thing. They've been trying to increase their gameplay. Well, they have been increasing their gameplay in London every year. The games are sold out. The NFL tells us the British people love it. Is there a buzz surrounding American football being played in Europe?
Well, I mean, I don't live in London,
right,
so it's difficult to say sort of week to week. But my understanding is that the ratings numbers on Sky Sports in England have only increased year over year. And obviously they're playing more games there. I think in that case, the NFL is a significantly more established business model and has worked very hard to become an established component of sport in England. Will they put a team there eventually? I don't know. I think there's a lot of logistical hurdles to get over before that becomes a reality. But their goal wasn't necessarily to become a top 2 or 3 sport in England. Their goal was to become, a part of the sports radar in England and abroad. And I think that the NFL has worked very hard it's pretty clear, having been there for one game week, that there, at the very least, is a significant awareness of the NFL, which I don't think existed before.
I mean, I'm not expecting all of them to realize the rules or understand the rules, because I don't think many Americans understand all the rules. But was there a conscious understanding of what was going on during the game, for the game you were at?
I mean, yeah, I would say so. I think that in the same way that, there are aspects of soccer that the average American, or certainly aspects of cricket that the average American doesn't understand, there are certainly plenty of aspects of the NFL that British fans don't understand, but I don't know that necessarily takes away from the enjoyment of it. My sense was that there were a lot of fans from London and other parts of England who have, enjoyed following the NFL week to week and have adopted teams and were happy to come and have the opportunity to see a game in person. I mean, to be honest, I think most American fans, or many American fans, would agree with me in terms of the sentiment that I prefer to watch the NFL on television as opposed to the in-stadium experience.
True, very true.
So that's one of those atmospheres, or that's one of those sports, rather, where the atmosphere can be great, but in general, I think it's a sport that's better consumed on television.
I want to thank Sam Borden for coming on the podcast today. Before you leave, Sam, to play us out, I have 3 quick questions for you. Ready?
Sure.
All right. What is the best soccer stadium you've gone to?
I would say that the best stadium I've been to, I really enjoyed going to the Maracanã in Rio. I thought that was a fantastic environment, and the fans are excellent. And I have a soft spot for the Camp Nou in Barcelona, if only because I think that the sort of environment and the big game feel that goes with that stadium is unmatched.
Number 2, what is the most underrated aspect about Paris?
Well, my sense is that it's a pretty highly rated city. I'm trying to think of anything that's underrated about it. I would say that there are certainly many aspects of Paris, the city itself, that are maybe less known than the Eiffel Tower. I think that it might not get as good a rap as a kid-friendly city, and I have young children, and there are like an abundance of parks and playgrounds, the Jardin Luxembourg, the Tuileries. These are wonderful places to take kids. I think Paris is often thought of as you take your girlfriend or your wife there, and it certainly is a great city for that. But having kids and living here is not so bad either. Yeah,
I'll just say I visited Paris a few years ago, and I went in thinking that the ugly American view that Paris was snobby and all that. I thought it's the best international city I've ever gone to. And the last question, this opinion has changed a lot throughout the years with different people. Was the Seinfeld series finale a good episode?
It's a long time since I have seen that episode. I would say, as a creative person who writes, and comes up with my own beginning, middle, and ends, I'm usually pretty loath to criticize any writer or creator's ending. And I think I've seen where, Larry David and Seinfeld have talked about their feelings about that ending. And I guess I would say that just because a reader doesn't find it, or a viewer doesn't find it satisfying, doesn't mean that it's a good ending.
That works for me. I want to thank Sam Borden. He is the European sports correspondent for the New York Times. You can follow him on Twitter at Sam Borden. Sam, thank you for being on the Red Ticket Blues podcast. My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I really want to thank Sam Borden of the New York Times for coming on. I truly appreciate it, especially with the hour difference. We were able to meet up over Skype and complete this. So, hope everyone enjoyed it. You can always listen to the show on iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, and YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at BrianBuck13 and at Red Ticket Blues. Like the show on Facebook, and remember to always leave a review, okay? Always. And with all that being said, I'm out of here.